When I was a lot younger, my family decided to take a vacation to North Carolina. They always tried to plan some kind of vacation out of state once a year during the summer, and this year it was to the beach and a national park. The theme was apparently nature, and to be more educational. My parents were always big on learning outside of school too, but they always made it fun, which I appreciated. Anyways, there were 5 of us total. My mom and dad, my younger sister, myself, the middle child, and my older brother. And with 5 of us, they found it easier to get a hotel rather than camping, so that's where we stayed. It was a nice hotel, though. It had free breakfast where, sometimes, my older brother and I were allowed to walk down there together while they finished getting ready. Where other days, we just waited with them, depending on how long my brother wanted to sleep. The hotel also offered a few free snack vouchers a day, which was great. We were allowed to go and exchange them for something of our choice once daily. Being a young adult now, I can tell the hotel was very family-friendly. It had an indoor pool with a small one to the side for kids. The vouchers and free breakfast, of course, helped reduce the cost of meals and food you may have to pack too, so I can see why my parents chose it. What I didn't understand was why people went there and would get upset about seeing kids running around. I don't expect everyone to be patient or accepting of kids. I had siblings and now a couple nieces and nephews, but I don't want any kids myself. However, I can't imagine being angry at just seeing a kid around me, especially in public. However, there seemed to be one guy, probably about middle-aged, at the hotel where, no matter where he was or what he was doing, he seemed to have a permanent scowl on his face. I remembered him because he almost looked scary. I saw him in the pool, in the breakfast area, and even at the ice machine. He would look around, especially at me, and just look annoyed. I just did my best to avoid him. My first personal interaction that I'd had with him was in the pool. On this day, we got hit with a hellacious thunderstorm, so we stayed indoors. But we still wanted to have some fun, so the pool it was. He was in the hot tub alone when my family walked in. There were already a lot of people, adults and kids, in the swimming pool, and they were all playing, laughing, and screaming. My brother asked about going to the hot tub, which is when I looked over at it and noticed him there. My parents told my brother no, most likely because they saw the man in it and told him maybe he could later. So, we all got in the pool and enjoyed ourselves. The hot tub was closer to the entrance of the pool, so the guy was pretty close. After some time, I approached my mom, who was sitting near the entrance playing with my little sister, and I was telling her about something. I don't remember what happened, but something caused me to laugh. As I was laughing, the man in the hot tub got up, said something that I couldn't make out, and then left. But he looked angry. I remember asking my mom if he was okay, and she looked over at him and just shrugged, saying something about just being in a bad mood or something. The rest of the time in the pool went fine. But the worst of it was the next morning when we went to have breakfast. My brother wanted to sleep in some, so I had to wait for my parents to get ready so we could all walk down together. Once we got down there, I once again noticed the man from the pool sitting at the table in the back, reading a newspaper and drinking coffee. He didn't even have a plate in front of him. There were 2 other families sitting down there at the time. One of them had 4 kids with them, all close to our ages, and the other couple had a kid probably close to my age, and then an infant. The baby was starting to cry as they comforted them, and one of the kids from the other families was starting to whine about something else. We picked out a table and my mom sat with my little sister, while my dad took me and my brother up to the buffet to get our breakfast. When we returned, my mom went to get her and my sister's plate. I looked around the room as I do while I eat, and I noticed the man again. He was still sitting at the table with no food, but he had laid his newspaper down and was just staring at the family's table in anger. I looked away and tried not to think about it because he was pretty scary looking to my young self. As my family talked about our plans for the day, the man was a forgotten memory for the time being, and I asked to get seconds. My parents said that I could, as they could see the buffet line from where we sat, so I got up to get more. As I walked up, I noticed the angry man was also approaching, so I slowed my pace some to let him go ahead. However, he went past me, so I assumed he wasn't going to the food, so I went forward. But then, right as I walked toward the first container, the man shoved past me, nearly knocking into me, slammed open the container lid, used his hands to grab a biscuit, and then slammed it closed. I was a kid, and I at least knew better than to use my hands for the food. You were supposed to use the tongs to get the food. I was also standing in front of the same container. It was pretty obvious that I was trying to use it, so he could have left it open, but he was rude and he shut it on me. But, again, I was a kid, and I certainly wasn't going to say anything, so I slowly opened the lid again and got my food. The man was now towards the other end getting more coffee. I finished making my plate when I heard my brother call my name. He asked me to grab him a biscuit too, so I went back to grab another one. As I turned around to head back to the table, the man once again cut me off, but this time he was too close, causing us to collide, and spilling my biscuits and gravy all over both of us. A majority of it got on his shirt and pants, but some of it got on my hand and arm and burned me a little. The entrance wasn't that big. I was in the center, sure, but I was also trying to be very careful while carrying my plate. The man was not close enough to the entrance. He was still making his coffee and getting whatever else he had, so he should have waited for me to pass. However, much like the lid thing with him cutting me off, it seemed like he was just trying to be an ass and cut some little kid off, taking advantage of his authority. However, that did not work in his favor as he was now wearing my food. I immediately gasped and my eyes started to water. This man scared me as is, but when I looked up and saw that he was red in the face, I tried to hold back and apologize to him, but he immediately started yelling at me and pushed me back. He made a comment about me being stupid and not paying attention, which, of course, got my parents to take action. My dad immediately went into protector mode and got up to come over to me. He asked me if I was okay or hurt, and I said that I wasn't, so he told me to go back to the table, and I did, now full-on bawling. The whole time, this man was yelling at my dad, saying some pretty hurtful things about us being stupid, about being not well-behaved, and that I even needed an ass-whooping for spilling my food. My dad put his hand out trying to reason with the guy and apologize, but the guy wasn't having it. He continued to get louder until my dad eventually said something to him about needing to calm down. Apparently the guy didn't want to hear this because, as my dad turned around to just leave the situation, the guy punched my dad, knocking him to the ground. I screamed and called for him, and I watched as my dad tried to get up, but this guy was nearly on top of him, wailing on him. The other family's kids were screaming, we were screaming and crying, and I didn't know what to do. I was still very young. I was terrified that he was going to kill my dad, and that it was going to be all my fault. Thankfully, there are good people out there, and two men interjected to pull the angry guy off of my dad. They held him down and yelled for someone to get help, but the hotel staff had already come over after hearing the commotions. They called the cops. The guy was arrested and kicked out, and they almost kicked us out, but the other families were great witnesses and explained to the staff what had happened, convincing them that we did not provoke this guy, and that my dad didn't even lay a finger on him. After everything calmed down, we went back to our room with the day and mood practically ruined. And not to mention me, a young child, thinking that it was my fault, too. I felt like if I was just a little more careful, I could have avoided all of this. But over time, especially, replaying it all in my head and comparing it to what my brother saw as he witnessed it, it wasn't my fault. The guy had been off to the side, looking at the containers of sauces and jelly. My brother said that he watched him look up at me, drop the jelly he had in his hand, and then walk towards me. We both saw him turn sideways, making a conscious effort to squeeze past me, but the space that he had was not big enough for him. He turned too quickly, and he caught my plate, causing the whole thing to spill. This was a grown man doing this, and then he tried to blame it on a child? Who does that? What grown man enjoys going off on a child like that? And not to mention, he was violent with a complete stranger. I kind of understand being annoyed maybe about kids screaming and crying, but my family wasn't even doing any of that. We were taught to have very good manners, especially in public, inside voices and so forth. So why get mad at a random uninvolved family? I feel like he was just fishing for a reason to go off. Sorry, I'm rambling a bit at this point, but the bottom line, this man gave me nightmares, and everywhere we went for that trip and the rest of that summer, I was traumatized. I didn't want to go anywhere without my dad, and I didn't want him to go anywhere alone, feeling like I needed to protect him. I still have a slight phobia of being alone with strangers, but I have gotten better. Just a few words to that man. I hope that you got some help, because that reaction was not normal. Oh, and I hope that we never meet again. Alright, so I have a story about a crazy ex that did a lot to try and ruin my life and drive me insane. And I would say he damn near succeeded. There was a point during all this where I thought that he was going to escalate to physically harming, or worse, possibly killing me because he was clearly crazy. The worst part of all this is that he didn't come back with a vengeance until nearly 7 years after we broke up. I know that's a strong start, but it's important to not understate how messed up this man was. I guess I should start by mentioning the ex himself, Peter. Peter and I were together in our last 2 years of high school and a year after that. So between the ages of 17 and 19. After those 3 years, we grew apart, which happens in young relationships. He had an idea for what he wanted to do, I had different ideas, and even though we both wanted the other to be in our future, it just wasn't going to work out. I don't remember who started the breakup process, but we ended up just splitting up, and that was that. Well, it wasn't the end of it all, obviously, but at the time I thought that it was. Fast forward 7 years, so at the time of the story, I was 26. When out of nowhere I got a friend request from someone on Facebook. Lo and behold, it was Peter. The same Peter that I was madly in love with as a teenager. It was kind of nice to see his name. A bit nostalgic, but nothing more for me, as at this time I was seeing someone. I hit accept and sent him a quick message. It was literally just, "Hey Peter, nice to see you. I hope you're doing well. We should catch up sometime." Nothing outside of an ordinary message that you would send to an old friend that you hadn't seen or heard from for a while. Then I went to work and forgot about it, because it really wasn't that important to me. Later that day, I checked Facebook again and saw that he had replied. He said hi to me and then said that he would love to catch up, and told me he would be at a coffee shop that evening at around 5 or so, if I wanted to swing by and talk for a bit. It was a bit direct and sudden, like he was going to be there expecting me, so I was a bit hesitant, but I figured I would go and say hi. I had mentioned it to my boyfriend, and I was very honest with him, telling him that it was my ex from high school and that he wanted to meet up. I actually asked him to come along, basically saying that I wanted to make sure there wasn't anything extra in this situation. I didn't think Peter would do anything odd, but I also wanted to be transparent with my current boyfriend. So, we drove to the coffee shop together, and at first I looked around at the shop to see if Peter was there. But I didn't see him. Well, not until we went to order and he came out from the back and walked up to the register. This made a bit more sense as to why he told me he would be there without asking to meet me there. He was a barista at the shop. When he saw me, he put on a huge smile, and then he saw the guy that I was with, and it very quickly fell to a slight grin. There was some very small talk, and after putting our order in, he said that he would come out so we could chat in a couple of minutes. I said okay, and me and my current went and sat down at a table. A few moments later, he came out and sat down with us, and we did catch up. I introduced him to my boyfriend, told him how we met, and then we chatted a slight bit about the time that had passed. And it was nice. I thought that it was just a bit of catching up, and while he seemed a bit upset that I had a current boyfriend, I think he took the hint that I just wanted him to be a friend. During this conversation, he ended up asking me where I was living, and I made a mistake telling him that I had a townhome in a small community a few miles north. I didn't tell him which unit, but I did mention the property name, mostly because he asked me for it, because he said he was looking for a new place. We talked for 15 minutes or so, and then he had to get back to work, and again, that was that. So, all of this context out of the way, here's where things went south. It was small at first. One day when I had gotten home from work, and when I pulled up, I noticed that my flower pots that had been sitting on my front step were missing. I was definitely confused about that because they were all approved by the property. I checked. I had made sure that it wasn't an issue, and my neighbors didn't mind me having them. The units didn't share front steps, and they were far enough to not be in the way of anyone on the walking path. I actually asked my next-door neighbor if she had seen anything or knew what happened, and she was as clueless as I was. The office also didn't have anything to do with it, so it was definitely weird, but I had to chalk it up to just some jerk stealing my plants or some kids being idiots. There were a few more small things that happened. I guess they were pranks, but they were petty and just annoying more than anything. One day when I got home, I found that my front doorknob had been spray painted. As in, someone took red spray paint and literally just blasted my doorknob and door really quick. Enough to cover part of it, and a small paint spot on the door. This sucked, because I had to report it to the office, and they were not too happy about it. Then I found out that someone had smashed eggs on the back sliding door, which was a pain to clean up. There was sugar poured all over my back step and around the back area, which led to a really ugly ant problem. It was just small BS like this. Pranks that were annoyances and had me thinking that one of my neighbors had it out for me for whatever reason. But then it escalated. The first thing that happened that made me feel unsafe and uncomfortable was when I got home and went to my bedroom. I found my personal laptop sitting on my bed and open. I knew for a fact that I hadn't left it there because I don't use my laptop in bed. It sits on my little corner desk that I have in the room. I was a bit panicky, but I grabbed it and moved it back to the desk and woke it up. There were 2 windows open. The first was my Facebook. It was on my wall, and I could see that there were several posts on my account that I hadn't made, including a few posts with pictures of my 2 credit cards that I left at home, and posts with me, I guess, calling myself a few unsultry names. The other window was a note with a notepad that said, "I'm not done yet." I was terrified. I called my boyfriend and asked him to come over and immediately called the office informing them that someone had broken into my unit. I had to explain what I'd found, and they told me to contact the police as well, which I did. Obviously, they couldn't do much, as they didn't see any signs of a break-in. They took the information that I gave them, explaining the laptop and other things that had been done to my unit. They agreed that it seemed like somebody was messing with me, told me to call them if anything happened, and suggested that I do the obvious. Protect myself, get cameras, etc. I didn't really have time to heed their suggestions, as the next event that happened was the worst. I had once again come home from work, horrified that I was going to find something else to show that someone was going to do something to me, and it got worse when I was correct. I walked into my home and I immediately smelled something that was, simply put, absolutely disgusting. Near vomit-inducing levels of gross. Part of me just knew that it was coming from my bedroom. It was near instinctual, and when I walked into my room, I was mortified. There was a dark red, disgusting liquid that had been splashed all over my room. The walls, the carpet, my bed, the door, literally everywhere. I quickly learned what this substance was because there were containers sitting all over the room that were labeled beef blood. I wanted to puke. I went through the same process of calling my boyfriend, the office, and the cops, and it was such a terrifying situation. I think the police took this one a bit more serious because it was escalating, and this person was clearly unhinged, and they figured he was likely going to get violent. Then, I hit an actual moment of luck. While the police were there and investigating things, and I was talking to the property manager, my neighbor had come home from her day at work. Obviously, she asked what happened, and I told her, and when I mentioned it, she kind of lit up. She told me to hold on, and then told the police that she may be able to help. She ran inside and then came back out with a tablet, looking eager. Apparently, after the last incident, she had gotten a bit concerned with our security, and she went and bought a small camera to put up in the back, one that covered her back patio and was able to see my back door as well. She scrolled through the day, and then found a time, about an hour after I went to work, where there was motion in the back. And right there, on the screen, was video evidence that my ex, Peter, had broken into my home. He walked up from her side. There weren't any fences or anything, it was just wide open. And he was carrying a tote bag, which I assumed had the blood containers in it. I watched as he grabbed my sliding door, lifted slightly, and shoved it open, which is actually the exact moment that I learned that the lock on my sliding door didn't quite catch like it was supposed to. Apparently that unit had a faulty door, which Peter figured out at some point in time. I'm assuming he was looking to escalate and trying to break in, and stumbled upon the faulty lock. The image was clear. It was 100% obvious who it was and what he was doing. I told the officers who it was, and I told them that I knew where he worked, and about how we had caught up a few weeks prior. That video footage was enough to close this whole case. It was clear who it was. It was clear what he had done, and he was subsequently arrested for it. He actually pleaded guilty to the whole thing, almost like he was proud of it. He wasn't charged with much, though. Mostly the breaking and entering and vandalism, and the destruction of property. Thankfully, for me, not him. What he damaged had a high cost of replacement, so he was hit pretty heavily at the end. I don't remember exactly how much time he ended up getting. I think it was a year or two. And this was a few years back at this point, so he has since gotten out. But I don't think he stuck around because I haven't seen him, and I hope to God that I never do again. I don't mean to start this story dramatically, but there is something universally unsettling about realizing a person you work with every day may have a darker side. My story centers around a man that I used to work with, whom I'm going to refer to as Marcus. That's not his name. In fact, I'm not using any real names in this story for several reasons. Marcus was my boss. He was a diligent man, albeit slightly eccentric. He worked as a head librarian above myself and a few other people in my hometown. And the whole time that I knew him, I honestly respected him and thought that he was a decent guy. I'm not a good judge of character, apparently. This whole thing started in my 3rd month of working at the library. I was still getting used to their stack system and how the library was formatted. The whole thing was kind of confusing, but I was getting there. My favorite part of working at the library was working with the kids that used it to do schoolwork and research. I guess I should add that this was the early 2000s, so before everyone and their brother had a smartphone and unfettered internet access. So when kids would come in to look for information on fossils or history projects, I loved helping them. At the time, I was considering becoming a teacher, but it just hadn't yet gone through the schooling, so this was a good experience. On that morning, Marcus was having me help him reorganize the archive section of the library, which was the small room in the very back of the library. It was its own separate room with a door near the rear exit. This was where old newspapers and periodicals were kept, if there are people out there that don't know the purpose of the archives. As we worked, Marcus and I were just chatting it up, and we somehow got on the topic of children. I think it's because I had mentioned wanting to be a teacher, and said that I loved working with kids. While I was talking about it, Marcus seemed kind of uncomfortable about the whole conversation. I could see his face, and without a better description, he looked like he had to go to the bathroom but was holding it in. I asked him if he was okay, and he laughed and said that he was. I said that he was looking a bit pale, and he mentioned that his stomach was hurting and he excused himself. I told him that I wouldn't go anywhere and just figured something was physically wrong with him. Now, there may be some red flags going up here, but at the time it was just weird behavior by someone I had worked with for 3 months. Odd, but nothing more than that. It wasn't until a couple of weeks later where things really happened. I had completely forgotten about that day. It was practically a non-event. It was a pretty normal day, really. Nothing was going on, and there were only a few kids in the library. Once again, Marcus and I were doing a bit more of the reorganization of the archives, which was a small project that we had been working on here and there. It wasn't really a critical project for us. While we were fixing things up, a girl walked into the room with a notebook in her arms. She looked to be around 11 years old or so. I had seen her in the library before a few times, so I wasn't surprised to see her, minus the strangeness of a kid being in the archive section. When she walked in, Marcus stopped doing what he was doing and walked over to her, asking if she needed help with something. The way they talked, it seemed like he knew her and she knew him. She was comfortable enough to talk to him about a project that she was working on for school. I actually remember the project, too. She was supposed to look up newspaper articles for her birthday from 20 years before she was born, and write up anything that happened that day in that year. It seemed like a pretty neat project, just to get kids associated with researching historical events and whatnot. She told Marcus what she needed to do, and I mentioned that I could help her while he did the reorg, if he wanted. But when I said that, I saw his face drop, almost like he was disappointed that I had said that. He then mentioned that he would help her, and walked over to one of the cabinets. After a few moments of them looking and me doing what I was doing, Marcus hollered over to me and asked me if I could go to the front to see if the front desk needed help with putting stuff away. It was a bit of an odd ask. They were well staffed, and I didn't see any reason for me to do it, but he was my boss. And I just said, all right, and that I would be right back in a few moments. Again, at the time, it seemed like no big deal, but looking back, it was a strange thing for him to ask me to do at that exact moment. I went up to the front and talked to the clerk, asking if they had anything they needed help with. The two people up there kind of glanced around like they were seeing if there was any extra work, but they said that they had things under control. I said okay and decided to stop at the restroom really quick before going back, figuring I would take the moment to myself since he had sent me to the front. After I finished up there, I went back to the archive room to let Marcus know that they were all good up front, but when I got to the archive room, it was empty. No Marcus, no girl. The table in the center of the room still had her notebooks on it, with one of the older newspaper scans sitting on the table as well. For literally no reason, I immediately had a really bad feeling about this. I had no reason to suspect Marcus of doing anything, but my gut was telling me that he had. I stepped out of the archive room, and immediately, it got worse. The back door to the library has a bit of an issue with sticking. If you didn't push or pull it all the way shut, it wouldn't close. And I saw that the back door was cracked open, like it had been used and not shut properly. I pushed it open and looked out into the parking lot, just in time to see Marcus back out of his spot and pull out of the parking lot. Worse yet, I could see the girl he was talking to sitting in his back seat, looking scared and confused. I immediately ran back into the library and to the front desk, yelling that they needed to call 911 and that Marcus had just kidnapped a child. They both looked at me like I was insane, but I told them that there was a girl in the archives room before he sent me to the front earlier, and that I had just seen him pull away with her in his back seat. The older of the two librarians said that there was probably some sort of logical explanation, but the other one, a girl about my age, understood the gravity of the situation. She grabbed the phone and called 911, handing it to me and then saying that she was going to go check the security camera to see if she could see it happening. I explained to the dispatcher what had happened, telling her that my boss, Marcus, had potentially just kidnapped a young girl from the library, and that I saw him drive away with her in his car, and that she looked scared. I described his car, color, make, and model, and told them what I recalled of his license plate, which was just the first 3 numbers. They said that they would send the police there immediately and to lock the library down if possible. I'm sure that was just standard procedure just in case, but they asked us to not let anyone else in, and to ask others to stay in the building. The cops showed up and asked me to talk with them about the situation, and mentioned that they had several officers on the lookout for his car in town, and that they would find him. I explained the whole thing to them as I knew it, and the other librarian showed them the footage, which was when I first saw it too. There, on grainy early 2000s security footage, was Marcus holding this girl's hand and leading her out of the room, and out the back door, only a couple of moments before I returned. And this was obvious confirmation that he had kidnapped this girl, and that was likely why he had sent me away. He needed the opportunity. To wrap this story up, because I know it's gone on for a while, the bolo was successful, and they found his car. He was driving on the outskirts of town towards a highway, and they were able to get him stopped in a somewhat forceful manner. The girl was unharmed, but was obviously very scared, and very confused as to what was happening. He said that he was taking her home, but she told the officers that he said he was going to help her with her school project. She said that he had told her that what she was looking for was in a box in his car, and then that he had shoved her in the back seat, and took off as I walked out and saw it happen. He was arrested, and her parents were called to the library, which was another unfortunate part of the story. Her parents had dropped her off and said they would be back later, so she was there alone. This wasn't an uncommon thing, though. A lot of parents used to drop their kids off while they went to work, basically using the library as a free babysitter because it was, quote-unquote, safe enough. That stopped pretty much immediately, and the library implemented a rule that all children under 16 had to have an adult with them, because of this event. I don't have any proof of this, but I did hear of rumors that the police went through Marcus's apartment, and they found some rather disgusting things on his computer hard drive. Things I won't explain here, which tells me that he had very ill intent with that girl. In the end, I'm glad that she was unharmed because God only knows what could have happened to her had he not been stopped. So, I just got home from the police station due to a related event that happened 2 months ago. Now that there was a slight update on the situation, I wanted to share this here. I'm an avid walker, and I love walking at night the most. I love the quiet and stillness of the world at night. There are no cars driving around, no honking, not even dogs barking. Depending on my mood, it's just the slight patting of my feet and the clicking of my dog Colonel's feet. Or maybe some music in my ears. It was always so therapeutic to me. So per my norm on this night, I put on my workout clothes, pulled my hair up, and got Colonel on his leash and headed out the door. My walk was typically around the block, and if we were feeling up to it, we may cut through part of the walking trail across the street. That night, I was tired, but I still needed to walk, so I was just planning on walking around the neighborhood. As we walked, I became lost in thought, enjoying the peace and solitude of the night, as well as thinking of my plans for the following day. Over the hill in front of me, I saw the headlight of an oncoming vehicle that seemed to slow down as it passed me. It continued on, so I thought nothing else of it at the time. Shortly after, I heard the low whirring sound of a motor from behind me. A car was now coming from the opposite direction. I watched the headlights grow wider as it got closer to me, and in my peripheral vision, I saw the car slow to a halt until it was matching my walking speed. I, of course, looked over as they rolled down the window. I immediately noticed that there was only the driver in the vehicle. Colonel was immediately doing his protective growl, but it was quiet. He knew he wasn't supposed to do it, as he typically did it to all strangers at first, but I also know that it's something to pay attention to. Dogs aren't typically wrong when it comes to knowing a person, right? He greeted me with a smile and asked me for directions to the closest gas station. I thought it was kind of odd because if you were from the area, you knew of the two closest ones. But if you weren't from around the neighborhood, you may not know about the one that was hidden away. But if that's the case, why were you in this area in the first place? The road that I was walking was all residential. It wasn't a main road that had a lot of businesses on it. You either lived here or knew someone that did. Keeping this in mind, I just told him the direction of the larger, more known gas station in the area. He thanked me, and then, to my surprise, he asked me if I needed a ride. I thought this was weird. I was clearly walking by choice. I had activewear on and had my dog. But I let it go, letting out a slight laugh and politely declining, saying that I was enjoying my walk. He nodded, thanking me again, and drove off. I watched as he drove past me, and instead of turning left, like I had explained, he turned right. This immediately put me off of this whole situation. Did he just stop to talk to me? Did he just want to offer the ride to get me in his car? Whatever the case was, I didn't want to go towards the car, so I turned around. I had only gotten halfway through my walk when I saw the car, so turning back, I just had to take a left and then down the end of that road and across the street. I picked up my pace, and Colonel quickly picked up my plans as well. He moved to my right, keeping himself between me and the road. After turning left, I was feeling more at ease, knowing that I was almost home. But then I saw a tree being illuminated by something more than just a streetlight. It was headlights. And slowly, I watched a car turn right onto the street that I was on. The Colonel was immediately on guard again, watching the car as it slowly approached us and, once again, came to a stop. It was the same car, only this time the passenger door opened and a man got out. The Colonel lost it. He started barking and snarling like crazy, which terrified me even more. I started backing up, but Colonel stayed in place barking. I tried pulling on him, but he wouldn't move. I wasn't about to leave my faithful dog either. The man continued to approach me, but as soon as he got by Colonel, he tried to go for a kick, but Colonel was faster, and immediately latched onto his leg. I was freaking out, not wanting him to get hurt, but I didn't know what to do. The guy was screaming and flailing and demanding that I get the dog off of him, but I was frozen. Finally, I called for Colonel and he let go, but continued barking and jumping at the guy. He ran back and jumped back into the car, and then they sped off. I stood there for several seconds taking in everything that had just happened. When I finally came to, Colonel was at my side whimpering. I was worried he had been hurt, so I looked him over right there, but there wasn't a scratch on him. I hugged him as I couldn't have been more thankful for him in that moment, and we ran back home. I was standing in front of my neighbor's house and looked around one last time. I didn't want to go in my house in the case that they came back, and they would then see where I lived. When I saw the roads dark and empty, I quickly ran inside my home, locking the doors. I ran to grab my phone, feeling like an idiot for not taking it with me for once. I didn't feel like listening to the music, and since that's all I used my phone for while I walked, I had decided to leave it at home that night. I called the police, and they said that they would send someone out. Shortly after, 2 cops arrived and took my statement, and I gave them as much information as I could remember. Unfortunately, I could tell the car was dark, either gray, maybe black, and other dark metallic colors, but I didn't get the make and model. I also gave a description of the guys in it, but that's about all I could do. They said they would contact me if anything came up. They also did a quick sweep of the area, but didn't find anyone, unfortunately. This was a terrifying situation for me, and I fear what could have happened to me if I didn't have Colonel with me. However, I don't like to live in fear. I chose to learn from this experience. I got a wrist strap to carry my phone with me, always, and I also have a small can of mace that fits on my keychain. But, as I mentioned in the beginning, I had recently gone to the police station. Why? That's because I got a call from one of the officers that was there that night, asking me to come in and look at some pictures. They had received a report of a similar incident that happened nearby at a local bar. A woman was leaving, walking home, when she was stopped by a car asking if she needed a ride. She said that she was going to take it until she approached and saw a man in the back seat. When she saw this, she declined, but the guy in the back got out trying to pull her in. Thankfully, she had screamed enough to catch the attention of people nearby, and they took off. Her description of the vehicle and the 2 men matched mine, and being close to the area, they suspected that it was the same guys. But this time, one of the witnesses caught the type of vehicle, and when they showed me pictures of different ones, I was able to confirm that it was the same kind. So, now, there are at least 2 reports of these men trying to snatch women. And while I'm happy to hear that they have more information and are taking this seriously, I'm now worried all over again. I worry if they'll continue to try. I worry if they have been successful and no one knows. However, I will be amping up my safety even more now. If they come back, I will be prepared. Hopefully, they just get caught before it comes to that. A few summers ago, my girlfriend and I took a road trip along the coast. We wanted to see the Atlantic Ocean, and I wanted to take her to see the lighthouses as she was obsessed with them. She lived in Mass as a kid and remembered going to one with her dad, but they moved to the Midwest when she was young, and had never been back. I had never been to the East Coast, so I thought it would be fun for both of us. We made a whole road trip out of it, driving all the way up. Nothing but the trip itself was planned. Once we got there, we found a good hotel and booked it for a few nights. We went sightseeing around town that day. We explored some local stores and diners. We went to a museum and just had a leisurely day. The next day, we went to the beach and looked around for lighthouses. With some online maps and a site dedicated to lighthouses you can enter, or explore, we narrowed down a few that we wanted to check out, hoping to find the one that she would remember from her childhood as well. We actually did get to see the lighthouses, and one of them was the correct one, too. The beach was wonderful. The lighthouses were better than I expected. The view from them was outstanding, and I could understand her obsession with them now. The trip was going smoothly, and we both were having a wonderful time. We checked out of the hotel, and before heading home, we circled around a little further north, wanting to stop at another place on our list. As we headed in that direction, we spotted another lighthouse, but this one looked old and possibly abandoned. We also enjoyed a little bit of urban exploration, so we agreed that we should check it out too. We stopped in the parking lot at a nearby beach, and we walked to it. We walked through the sand, seeing it was clearly not as popular as the others we had seen. There was some trash scattered around, some items like beach toys left behind, and some other random detritus. It certainly piqued my interest. What could cause a whole beach to be abandoned or go unused? But pushing that thought aside, we finally reached the lighthouse, and we could really tell that it was not in use. The entrance merely had a piece of plywood barely covering it, but it wasn't bolted or screwed down. You could easily pick it up and place it right back down. After not seeing any trespassing signs, we went in and checked it out. It was definitely neglected. The walls seemed to be peeling in some places, crumbling or cracked in others. The stairs to the top even looked kind of rickety, but stable enough to climb. At least, stable enough for us to try. We got to the top, and it was just as worn down as we saw from below. The sight was still nice, however. We could see the ocean and the reflection of the sun on the water. There was even a slight chill that afternoon, which just made the day perfect. But then I noticed something that caught my attention. In the back, behind the staircase, there was a sleeping bag and a large backpack. We didn't notice it when we first came up because the staircase spiraled and the items were behind us. So it was obvious that someone had been sleeping there, and that wouldn't normally bother me. But what did cause worry was seeing that there was a plastic cup and a bottle of alcohol sitting next to it, and the cup still had liquid in it. Someone was there recently. Whether it's a house or just someone finding shelter wherever they could, it was natural for someone to become defensive over their stuff. I didn't want to risk running into whomever this belonged to and causing problems. So I told my girlfriend, Maria, that we needed to go, and she agreed. We quickly and cautiously walked down the stairs, but were startled by a man standing right outside the lighthouse. Maria gasped, and he gave us a toothless smile and said in a gravelly voice, "It's a nice view up there, ain't it?" We both gave nervous smiles and agreed with him, and I apologized for going in without asking. He started shaking his head in a dismissive way. the way you do when you're telling someone it's not a problem. But then he stopped and he looked us up and down. "Tell you what," he said to us. "I'll let you all go if you do something for me." He pulled out a wad of cash and held it up to me. "I'll give you this money if you let me have some alone time with your pretty little friend there." He looked right at Maria with a creepy grin. I was horrified by what he had just suggested and said. He would let us go? As if he was keeping us there. I stepped further in front of her and told him, "No effing way, dude," holding my hand out to keep him back. But before I could turn back to Maria and tell her to start walking back, the man pulled out a knife and said, "Well, I wasn't really asking," and started walking towards us. I wasn't much of a fighter, but I have learned some things over the years. I went in motioning like I was going to punch him, and since he was focused on my arm, I was able to kick him in the shin, knocking him off guard, but not before he brought the knife down and cut my arm open. I then pushed him backwards, causing him to fall on his back, and of all things to do in that situation, the guy started laughing. But not even his laugh sounded normal. It was almost like a sinister or evil laugh. Maria tugged at my arm, so we left him there and took off back to our car. When we got to the car, we started cleaning up my arm and realized that it wasn't that deep at all. I kept a first aid kit in the trunk for emergencies such as this. Being stabbed by a homeless guy. We pulled it out and just put some gauze on it, which was fine. I mentioned reporting it to the police because not only was he violent, but who knows what he would have tried to do to me, or worse, Maria, if I hadn't fought back. However, Maria said that we should just let it go, mentioning we may have been trespassing too. I wanted to respect her wishes though, so we never reported it. We left there thankful to be in one piece, but still made some great memories and took some wonderful pictures as well. I just won't be going to any more abandoned lighthouses, if we ever go back. I've had multiple internet stalkers in my life. 9, to be precise. 3 of them were genuinely scary. One might say that I should learn my lesson and shut social media down, but I'm a self-published author and artist, and the only way to promote my work is via the internet. Also, why should I run and hide and not display my talents because of a few delusional lunatics? This must be part and parcel of being a creator. This was 2013, and I ran 2 blogs, a Facebook page, and a Twitter. I'll keep it vague so as to not identify myself, but something happened that year that was historically significant. History nerds worldwide were excited. I had drawn a caricature of a crazy historian involved in the event that went viral online. Because of this, I gained numerous followers and attention, including from a famous author who happened to be my celebrity crush. Some attention was pretty negative and even vicious, but I made real friends out of it. Life was good. I also had a Tumblr where I blogged about this history topic. The blog sort of evolved into a classic rock thing after the history community on there became toxic, with other stalkers. That's a story for another day, but you'd be surprised how nasty and tribal history nerds can be. Eventually, I deleted the entire Tumblr and started afresh. It was such a relief. About a year after the history community drama, someone who I will call Autumn Girl followed me on my new Tumblr, and I followed them back without thinking too much of it. I followed people all the time. Then, over on Twitter, I received a message from a woman who I will call Benny, thanking me for following her on Tumblr. I was shook because I didn't post anything on my new Tumblr that connected me to my Twitter. I didn't post any art that could link me to the viral drawing, no history nerd stuff. It was just about old rock bands and memes and music. I looked through her Twitter likes and noticed that she had liked my comments to a prominent historian way back in 2013. So, Somehow, a history community person had found my new Tumblr despite no art nor history on there. I must have done something to identify myself, but I couldn't think of what. I didn't put photos of my real face on Tumblr, but I did put photos on my Twitter. It might have been a post about the band Queen. Perhaps she recognized the way I wrote about the band from my old Tumblr. When I scrolled through her posts, I saw that back in 2013 she had posted a photo of my face that hadn't come from Twitter at all. It was my art website profile photo. So she was subscribed on there too. I'm able to see subscribers' email addresses, so I could see her email was Autumn Girl, like her Tumblr username. The viral drawing was for sale on there, so I guess I was easily findable. But posting my photo? That's just creepy behavior. It showed that she had been watching me for a year before contacting me, and had somehow tracked my new Tumblr down without me sharing links. Shortly after, I received a Facebook message from Benny, so she knew my full name. I was furious. I only revealed my first name on Twitter. My art website had a different name. I write novellas under a separate pen name, and I had never put any part of my name on Tumblr. I went to check my other serious blog that was strictly for my books, and surprise, Benny was on there too. It was linked to my art website because I draw my own covers, and directed people to buy my art from there. At a guess, I think she had stalked all the pages related to the history community and found my face in there. But she must have been operating under a fake profile. She wasn't in any of my Facebook groups I had left because of the crazy fighting in the history community. I simply assumed that she was one of those stalker trolls. I blocked Benny on Facebook, as I don't allow strangers, but stupidly decided to communicate with her on Twitter just to see what she wanted, and who she really was. She acted like a massive superfan, tweeting me all day, every day. My phone was vibrating constantly in my pocket at work. Mostly she was bragging, showing me all the stuff that she received for free at events, which I suspect were actually the spoils from a serious shoplifting habit. She also claimed to have a range of rare diseases and kept sending me photos of piles of pills that she was supposedly prescribed. One morning I woke up at 7 a.m., and my phone buzzed 36 times. All tweets from her in the early hours of the morning. That was the final straw. I blocked her on every platform. The following part is my fault. In the past, I had a lot of problems with my family who are highly dysfunctional. Back in my angry young student days, I vented about my family problems on Twitter. Benny also had an abusive mother and found my years-old tweets and commiserated with her own very wild stories of parental mistreatment. I really regret not deleting these tweets. The moment I blocked her, she went through the electoral register, which we shouldn't have been on in the first place, and doxed my mother on Twitter. She sent my tweets about my mum to her Facebook, which caused an almighty row at home. She wrote to my celebrity crush author telling him what a lunatic I am with a demand to stop following me. Worse, she tracked down one of the history freaks, a previous stalker, and falsely claimed that I had racially abused her as she's half Japanese. I am autistic, and she contacted the National Autistic Society to ask if vain narcissistic behavior was a symptom of autism, tagging me in it from a new account so I got the notification. She contacted other followers of mine who I knew from university and told them to pass messages on, complete with knife emojis and photos of blades that she had bought off the internet. And she was apparently cursing me with witchcraft spells. To my relief, there was a sudden hiatus where she was harassing someone else. I thought it was over. Until a year later. I was on holiday in 2015 when she reappeared with a new Twitter. In late 2014, I got into doll collecting and photography. So, from seeing me comment on someone's Tumblr post, blocking didn't work properly back then, she started messaging my friend that I still play with Barbies. I don't tell people about my doll collection. It's strictly between me and the fellow adult collector community. There was really no escape. Benny had come for my history nerding. She'd come for my art and writing. She'd gone for my celebrities, and now she was interfering with my doll hobby. More knife photos were sent, for which I called the police, who simply advised me to delete social media, and with it all my book and art sites. But no. I decided to play her at her own game. She began bragging about her art skills and how she was better than the autistic doll freak. I did a reverse image search on her painting, and it brought me to an art site for Autumn Girl. She was offering herself for commissions with her email address, phone number, and university. Through her university site, I found her real name, and then her home address. And that weekend, I signed her up for hundreds of pieces of junk mail, adult magazines, really weird random catalogs about farming and fishing. And then I sat back and watched her have an epic meltdown about how I, who she was now calling her long-term jealous stalker, had planted a GPS tracker on her and was threatening to come to her home. She deleted all of her accounts, and it's been 9 years since I last heard from her. I genuinely think that she was schizophrenic, because just before she deleted everything, she was claiming her family was trying to drug and kill her. Half of her pills were vitamin supplements. She was insane. I hope that she never finds me again. My art is no longer for sale, and I only do book cover commissions these days. I hope that she's getting some genuine medication now. Hi. A few hours ago, I listened to your recent video titled 6 True Creepy Encounters with Stalkers and Strangers. And as I was laying the laundry and heating up my lunch, I wondered if I ever had a stalker. And 4 events came to mind. But the worst of it all happened in 2018. In early October of 2018, I moved to a big city near my hometown, called Thessaloniki, here in Greece. If I said that wrong, I'm sorry. In general, that period of my life was a whirlwind of new experiences. I had just returned from spending a few weeks in Italy with an Erasmus exchange program, and I had a few weeks since losing another family member, the third in a 3-year span. I was emotionally a wreck and, at the same time, on high alert and numb. God knows how I could be all these conflicting emotions at the same time. I moved to my aunt's place, and one of my duties was to maintain, keep it clean, and stock the fridge and cabinets. But Thessaloniki is wildly known for its water and electrical outages. The city is so old that it was never designed to handle so many people, and many times around the spring to summertime, if there hasn't been rain in a lot of the city, it runs out of water. Or, if it has been a rainy or stormy weather, some electrical poles or grids have been damaged, some causing power outages for hours and up to days. In 2018, it was a similar situation around the months of March, April, and May. In March, I experienced my first announced water outage, but I'm a seasoned veteran when it comes to both water and power outages. I lived through them when I lived on an island that could go for weeks, up to a month without water or power, and even then we would have food shortages due to horrific weather conditions. So I did what I was trained to do. I bought water bottles and shut the toilet flasher, so when and if the water comes back, the power of the water running through the pipes does not do damage to the flasher or the pipes. I would slowly open it an hour after we get water. That way, I would be safe. My aunt had told me to log into a local Facebook group to get updates for which region of the city has power or water, and to check regularly with the Facebook page of the public water company. as they were posting updates. I was at the Facebook group for the city when 5 hours into the water outage, someone posted that their water had come back, and it was in my region. I quickly checked, but nothing yet. I knew these things took time. My region was a large one, so I had to be patient. Under the comments of this status, there was a guy named Abdullah, who was writing and asking if the water in the neighborhood of Saint Panteleimon was back. And the original poster said that he resided in the same area as Abdullah, and that he had water just fine. Abdullah then went on to post on the group saying that his entire apartment block doesn't have water, and that he felt it was discrimination, because the majority of the tenants were Middle Eastern. People in the comments were trying to calm him down and tell him to be patient, and that the infrastructure of the city hasn't been updated since the 1960s or 80s at best. And I dumbly decided to comment under Abdullah's post, saying that I lived in the same neighborhood and didn't have water. And I advised him to be patient, as it can take hours for the water to be fully restored, because we are so many people. Abdullah just liked my comment, and I went back to studying for college. 3 hours later, the water was back, and I was filling up plastic buckets with water and watering the plants, and was planning to start cooking food for days and have a bath. I was seeing posts of people saying now that they had power outages, so I was preparing for that. When my phone pinged with an Instagram notification, Abdullah had somehow found my Instagram and followed me. Mind you, back then, my Instagram was not connected to my Facebook account, and it was under a nickname of mine and didn't have a profile picture of my face, unlike my Facebook account, nor had I posted my face on Instagram. I was strictly doing landscape and nature landscape photography, but I had posted multiple Insta stories detailing the water outage saga in a funny manner, but they were viewed mostly by my real-life friends and 4 online friends. I never had a huge traction on my Instagram. Abdullah sent me a message on Instagram asking how the water pressure is for me, and I told him that all was normal and asked if the water was back for his apartment block. He confirmed that the water was back on, and now they were all preparing for the power outages in the early hours of the morning. I wished him good luck, and started meal prepping, and I dumbly posted about it on Instagram. The second this story was up, he asked me what food I'm making, and he shared his meal prep. We talked for a bit while we were both cooking. It was nice, and there was nothing ominous. But as I finished cooking and was planning to have a bath and unwind, I wished him a good night. But I did keep talking with my sister and some other friends on the app, and even posted a story or two if I recall correctly. Then, at 1 a.m., I noticed I had a message from Abdullah asking me quite rudely why I was not sleeping, and why I kept posting since I wished him a good night, and asking why I was a liar. I just told him that I was talking with my family before bed. He then started sending multiple messages calling me a liar because I posted I was watching a TV show while eating. I ignored his messages and silenced him, continuing my night peacefully. In the morning, as I was getting ready for class, I saw the new messages, and he was calling me horrible names. And then he stopped for 6 hours and had just sent a good morning text. I grew angry, and I told him that he was being rude and to stop calling me names. Then I went about my day. It was around 12 p.m. when I was in class, and I was busy trying to connect some cables to a very expensive camera and its tripod, when my phone rang loudly. I apologized to my professor and checked who it was briefly. It was Abdullah calling me through Instagram. I declined, and silenced, and disconnected from the internet, and then went back to my task. We were then taken out of the campus on an assignment. We had to shoot a small interview with the journalism class and interview some local vendors for a fake news report. And I was on duty to shoot landscape scenes in case the video footage my classmates shot was terrible, and we could use it as a plug-in with voice-over for the interview. So, I was taping the open market and the people when my team partner found a great shot area and called me over. So I went. Once everything was done, we met back up in class and reviewed the footage. When my classmates and professor noticed in most of my shots, there was a man always glaring at the camera from the sea of people. My professor zoomed in, and I got my phone out because this man was familiar. It was Abdullah. Thankfully, the shots weren't ruined, so they were used. I was a bit paranoid, though, leaving the campus and running my weekly errands after that, and even going home. I always checked over my shoulder, but saw nothing. 5 hours later, I reached my home and my phone connected to the Wi-Fi, when I was flooded by messages of Abdullah asking me who was the male that was with me, why did I have a camera, and then went on to ask why I wasn't answering and slut-shaming me. I wasn't as brave back then, and not as wise, so I just asked him to stop speaking to me this way, because if he continued, I would block him. He apologized and then started calling me dear or my dear. Those brought such an unpleasant shiver down my spine, and my gut was telling me that it was bad news. I ignored the pet names and asked him to not call me those because I wasn't his dear. From then on, he would spam me with likes on my stories and photos. I would be cordial with him on messages, but the moment that I took more than a minute to reply to his texts, he would start calling me names, and then apologize and call me dear. This went on for 2 weeks. I know, I should have ended it on day 1. Someday out of those 2 weeks, I was on break in between classes, and because I was the only female in my class, I was hanging out with my male classmates outside, since the majority smoked. That's when my phone pinged with an Instagram message from Abdullah asking why I'm hanging out with so many men, and why is one of those men hanging on my shoulder. Confused, I looked around me, but I couldn't see him. And the classmate that was holding my shoulder noticed my tense posture and scanned with me the area, when I told him about the creepy text I had received. He was holding my shoulders because he was telling me about the time he got sunburned, and we argued that cold yogurt would stand on the shoulder long enough to alleviate the burn. It can, by the way. I demanded from Abdullah how he knew, and he said that he saw me. I then boldly told him that we aren't dating, and that it's the 21st century, and that women can hang out with whomever they pleased, and that I don't have to answer to him. He was quiet for the rest of the day after that. It was the next day, and I was back in the same class with the professor who sent us on an out-of-campus assignment, having a fun discussion about Adobe Suite, and the amount of times that it's crashed on my professor the previous day, while he was on set filming a hit late-night show in my country, and how stressful it was. And he advised us on what to do when and if we find ourselves in a similar situation. And that's when my phone rang with an Instagram video call from Abdullah disturbing the class. I don't know what my face was, but I remember the fear and anxiety freezing my hands, and I started to shake. Back then, Instagram showed you the other person, but he couldn't see you yet. You had to hit accept, and then it connected to your front camera. I had no time to do anything because the phone was snatched from my hand, and my professor answered it, pretending to be my very angry father, demanding to know why he was video calling me this early in the morning. Abdullah hung up while mumbling a weak sorry. My professor wasn't a big guy, but he had a blonde, thick beard, long curly blonde hair tied in a ponytail, and wore a biker scarf on his neck, and was jacked with tattoos, and his voice was booming regardless of whether he was happy or angry. Honestly, when he was angry and yelling at us, he could easily play a Viking god in a Marvel movie. The moment Abdullah hung up, he handed the phone back, and jokingly referred to me as his daughter. I was just frozen in shock. Class resumed for 3 hours more. After class, I remained back and thanked him for scaring Abdullah, and he smiled, saying that he saw how tense I was last time we were outside and I got a text. and started to scan the area. He suspected I was in an abusive relationship, and he couldn't stand by and watch, but he advised me to go to the police right away. Walking out of the building, I checked for the nearest police stations, and there was one across the street from my campus. I just had to cross the street. Then, I noticed the unread messages from Abdullah, slut-shaming me and saying that he knew where I was going to college, and that he would soon find out where I lived, because he knew what bus I frequently used. And once he figured out that, he would come and take his revenge for not being good to him. I'd had enough, and I started taking screenshots of the entire conversations, and made a folder on my phone. It took 10 minutes, and then I decided to go to the police. I was walking out of the building when I saw the classmate from the sunburn story, and we chatted a bit, saying how he was heading towards the bus stop outside the police department, and that we should walk together. We were waiting for the green light to cross the street when I noticed Abdullah staring at me from across the street, where I had to go in order to reach the police station. I gasped, and my classmate noticed the whole thing and asked me if that was the creepy dude. And I said yes, not making any physical movement that would alert that I had told him who he was. I was just standing frozen in a blinking war with Abdullah when my classmate grabbed my arm and started walking fast in between moving cars, saying how I had to go to the police now, and that he would be my witness. We went to the police and reported him, emailed the photos to the police officer who took my case, and he would let me know if anything happened. Walking out of the police department, my classmates said that Abdullah's eyes when he was staring at me were so angry that they scared him. I was very careful for the rest of the year with my posting habits when on the Facebook group about the city. The owner of the group announced that Abdullah was a band member, and that he was arrested for stalking and even having attacked women all around the city, and told us to be aware of his many aliases online. I was shocked, but at the same time relieved that he was behind bars. A year later, around May of 2019, I received unknown text messages of someone saying that they would come to my house and assault me. I went to the police, in the same department as before, and by midday I was told that it was Abdullah's new phone number, and that he was out of prison. I then put a restraining order against him. And I have never been so careless since. This happened about a decade ago, when I was in my early 20s, but the memory of it still kinda gives me the creeps. At the time, my college friends and I had put our money together to rent a remote cabin in the middle of nowhere, in Kentucky, during our summer break. We were looking forward to escaping the city, throwing back some beers, and just getting to party without neighbors, or the authorities, putting a stop to it. Once we got there, we knew the seclusion part was accurate. The closest town almost an hour away, and we were surrounded by a dense forest. Don't get me wrong, none of this was a negative, either. It was exactly what we wanted. The 6 of us got in and started calling dibs on the sleeping arrangements immediately. The first few days passed without incident, or at least without ones that we didn't cause. Clayton got a little banged up trying to climb a tree, but otherwise we were good. On the 3rd night, though, things started to change. It was between 3 and 4 in the morning. We had all had our share of drinks and were passed out all over the place. I was sleeping in a small and uncomfortable, I should add, fold-out cot in the living room. Because of this, I was in that hazy space between wakefulness and sleep, when I heard the distinct sound of footsteps. It was a patterned thud, 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 that told me that it had to be somebody walking. The floors in the cabin were all wooden, or maybe the fake vinyl stuff, so you could tell when someone was walking around versus on carpet. But when I didn't hear the water running or toilet flushing, or even see the light from the fridge kick on, I started to look around to see where it was coming from. To my surprise, it seemed like it was coming from outside. Like I said, I wasn't fully awake, so I started questioning myself. Did someone go outside when I wasn't looking? Clayton and JP both smoked, but they went outside to do it, so maybe that's who it was. I was too tired to give it any more attention, so I just tried to fall back asleep. But shortly after, I heard what sounded like someone jiggling the doorknob, as well as a weird, metallic scraping sound. I admit, becoming a little annoyed, I thought that one of them had locked themselves out, so I got up to open the door for them. I unlocked the door and went to swing it open, but nobody was there. I looked down both sides of the porch and saw nothing. I went back in, locked the door, and saw that JP was actually passed out on the couch, and Slim was on the floor. Clayton, Xavier, and Liam were in the bedrooms and the doors were all closed, so I assumed that they were in their rooms. The bathrooms were even open and the lights were off, so from my perspective, it looked like everyone was asleep. Confused and tired, I just went back to my cot and passed out. The next morning, we were all groggy and just talking about the previous night and that day's plans. Something reminded me of my experience, so I asked the group who was messing around outside. They all stared at me confused. I explained what I had heard, and none of them had admitted to it. The three in the room said that they were in there all night. Slim said that he hadn't heard anything, which I could believe because he was out pretty hard, not even budging when I shut the door. JP said that he thought he heard something, but he also thought that it was just in his head, or that he was having a dream. I'm pretty sure he heard what I had heard, but was also too asleep to be bothered by it. So it really was just me that heard it, but yet everyone was in their place. So who could have been out there? Ultimately, I just had to let it go. I wanted to enjoy my trip and not get wrapped up in something that wasn't important. For all I knew, it could have been an animal that I had spooked when I was unlocking the door. We enjoyed the rest of the day, however. We hiked, we went into the town to refill our food and drinks, and found some other entertainment. Later that night, we made a fire in the pit out back and tested what we could all cook under the fire to eat. It was entertaining, to say the least. We were already a few drinks deep and having a good time when I started getting this weird feeling. I felt like I was being watched, like I was being preyed on. I looked around the tree line but didn't see anything, and all my friends were still in their spots by the fire. I didn't know how to explain this to my friends, so I just kept it to myself, keeping an eye on my surroundings. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid from the alcohol and the memories of the prior night. We finished up at the fire, put it out, and then went inside to go to bed. We all got into our designated spots. This time Slim slept on the lazy boy instead of the floor, though. I once again had troubles, drifting in and out of consciousness, so I thought I would just go take a hot shower to clear my head and help me sleep. I grabbed some things from my bag when I once again started hearing the footsteps. I stood straight up and remained in place, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. And once again, it had to be coming from the porch. I slowly approached the door again, hoping to open it before they would have time to react and catch them in the act. But the only problem with that was that the deadbolt made a significant click when locking and unlocking it. By the time I reached the door, the metallic scraping noise had started again. I slowly turned the deadbolt, balancing it as much as I could to avoid the clicking, and I thought I must have done pretty well because the scraping noise hadn't stopped. As it continued to speed up, I grabbed the doorknob and quickly swung it open. There was a rush of cool air that forced its way inside the door, but otherwise, there was nothing on the other side. No person, no creature, nothing. At that time, I ran out the door and walked all the way around the cabin, looking around the trees too. but I found nothing. There was no way they could have gotten away fast enough for me to not spot who or what it was. It didn't make any sense in my head. By the time I got back to the cabin, JP was standing in the doorway and asked me what I was doing. I explained again what I had heard, but that whatever it was took off. He mentioned that he had actually woken up to the scraping sound as well. However, when he heard it and woke up, the door was already standing open, and he didn't know what was going on. That meant that he heard the sound while I was outside. So how could whatever it was get away fast enough for me to not see them, but then hide and come back to do it again? And how did JP not see them with the door open? We just went back inside, confused, but trying to rationalize what it could be, until he finally fell asleep and I continued with my shower plans. The next day was our last one there, and we were going to be packing up and taking our stuff with us to whatever it was we decided to do that day. As we started leaving, I was the last one out, and as I stood by the cabin door resting my hand on the knob, it occurred to me that it felt rough. Doorknobs typically have smooth metal. I looked down at the knob, and to my surprise, it was scratched to hell. There were huge gashes all across the knob and the deadbolt. Something was obviously scratching at it. That's what made me realize what the sound was that I had heard the previous night, but then that started spiraling into more questions. If this was a person, then they were trying to break in. But why go to this cabin of all places? As mentioned, it was in the middle of nowhere. It's not like it was a row of houses to choose from, but then I thought, if this was a person, what could they have been using? Because the marks appeared to be evenly spaced, not like a single line from a screwdriver or a knife, or maybe even a crowbar. There were 4 parallel lines scratched all over it, like fingers or claws. So then, was it not a human? Was it something in the woods that was trying to get into the cabin? I nearly lost it, finally having proof of what I had been hearing, and called all my friends over. They all looked it over, and JP was the first to agree with me, confirming he woke up to the sound as well. We all agreed that it must have been something in the woods, but what? And why? I couldn't think of anything that could leave claw marks like that. Not to mention something that was fast enough to get away in the time it took me to open the door, but was also willing enough to go back to the door to do it again, with the door open right in front of the view of others. And if JP was being honest about hearing it, which I don't know why he would lie about it, then how could he have not seen it? This obviously disturbed me, thinking I had left the door wide open, and if the thing didn't run away, then there was a chance that it could have tried to attack my friends. And I couldn't live with the thought of putting my friends in that situation. Everyone else just shrugged it off, but it was something that I found myself thinking about a lot. I wanted to know what it was, why they did it, and what was it capable of. It's still something that lives rent-free in my mind, wondering how close to danger we may have actually been. Because, ultimately, the fear of the unknown is absolutely real. This was a summer a few years ago, where I used to work the night shift at a small burger place. It wasn't a big-name place like Burger King or McDonald's. It was a small, locally owned little shack kind of place. The kind that used to be all over, but are pretty much just retro bait at this point. It was just off the highway near my hometown, and it was kind of a cute little place. The crew was mostly just a bunch of high school and early college students that were looking to make some extra cash. Most of them were totally fine, but there were a couple that were a bit off. One in particular was this guy that worked there named Dave. Dave was in his late 20s or early 30s. Was skinny and pale, and he had stringy hair that was cut in a bowl cut. He also had pretty clear issues with hygiene, and as much as I don't like to comment on people like that, his issues were very outwardly visible. His uniform was typically pretty stained, like he didn't wash it, and he definitely smelled bad. And the other coworkers tended to avoid him, and I genuinely felt kind of bad for him because of this. But it was difficult to stay near him too long in the back. Dave was also pretty quiet, sometimes too quiet. He would just shuffle around the back and do what he was told to do by the managers while mumbling to himself. I thought that maybe he was at least somewhat self-aware, and he did realize that people didn't really spend time around him, so he was self-contained, if that makes sense. After a few weeks, though, I realized Dave's problems went beyond being an antisocial guy that smelled funny. I started catching him staring at me, like, a lot. I wasn't a fan of that, but it was when I caught him staring at some of the other girls, specifically the 2 girls that worked there that had just turned 16. His stares didn't seem flirty, really. They looked predatory, like a stray dog staring at a pile of meat. That kind of creepy stare. There was one time when I caught him watching one girl, Michelle, who again had literally just turned 16 a couple weeks prior. She was having to bend down to get something from a low shelf, and he was damn near panting while watching her. He was wide-eyed, licking his chapped lips, and transfixed on her. For a few moments, I just kind of stood there like, does he not realize that I'm standing right beside him while he acts like this? But then he started to, I guess the correct word is grind, against one of the prep tables slightly. As soon as I saw that, I had to step in. I walked up behind him towards Michelle and told him that he needed to knock off being such a damn creep. I then grabbed Michelle and took her into the back room and explained to her that she needed to talk to the manager about putting her anywhere that he could, away from Dave. I then told her what I saw, and she was seriously creeped out. I said that I would go with her to talk to the managers about it, but she said that she would be okay, that she would talk to the manager as soon as she could, and I told her that she could tell him to talk to me about it if she wanted. A couple of days later, I was taking the trash out, and I heard some rustling from behind the dumpster. I pulled open the gate, and there was Dave, crouched on the ground in the back corner, and eating a handful of French fries straight from a garbage bag. That's not an exaggeration. He was grabbing a fistful of fries from a bag that he had torn open, and he was eating them. I just stopped dead in my tracks and stared at him like, what the hell is wrong with you? He sort of laughed about it and just said, man, people are so wasteful, huh? I nodded, tossed my trash bag into the dumpster, and just turned to walk away, because I really didn't know how to process that situation. I ended up telling the manager about this because it was messed up. I knew for a fact that he wasn't homeless, and I knew he had a job. One where we could literally get free food. Why the hell was he crouching behind the dumpster and eating trash-covered French fries? The whole situation completely unfurled about 2 or so weeks after this. Yes, he was still employed there after being a creep to a teenager, and after eating dumpster fries. At the diner, we all had our own small lockers. They weren't much, but it was a nice touch for the employees. We could store our belongings in a locked box, so we knew they were closed and secured. Usually there weren't any problems with the lockers. We all had our own with our first names on them. We kept our purses or non-work clothes in them, and that was that. On this particular day, I had come in for my shift, and when I went to my locker, I noticed that something smelled rank. There was the smell of something rotting coming from the wall with the lockers. I didn't even put my stuff in mine. I went to the manager and told him that it smelled like something had died in one of the lockers. He followed me over to the wall, and when he finally smelled it, he nearly gagged. It was awful. Thankfully, we weren't busy yet. It was about an hour before the dinner rush, so he was able to call all the present employees over to ask them to unlock their lockers to see if there was something in them. At about the same time that we ruled out all the current employees that were there, Dave walked in the back door. The manager asked him to open his so he could see if there was a dead mouse or rat or something in it, because that's what we were all starting to think. A dead rodent had gotten in them. Dave says, sure, walks over like nothing is happening, and opens his locker. And we figured out what the smell was. His locker was full of hamburgers, most of them half-eaten, some of them looking like they'd been chewed up and spit back out into the paper. I nearly puked when I saw this all. I don't know if anyone that will hear this knows what several weeks old, cooked, and then set in a locker ground beef looks or smells like, but it was disgusting. The manager looked as appalled as the rest of us, like he had no idea what to do here. He ended up telling Dave to clean his locker out and to meet him in his office when he was done. Dave just shrugged and did what he was told, and afterwards, he left like there was literally nothing happening. He was obviously let go. The manager said that when he asked about the food in the locker, he said that he kept them in the locker in case he wanted them later. And when he asked how old the burgers in there were, he said that the oldest one was around 18 days old. More than 2 weeks. I have no idea how the smell hadn't permeated prior. Maybe it was just a thing with it all compounding, but it was terrible. I have no idea what was wrong with Dave, but he was just weird. Creepy, even. If it was just something that was wrong mentally with him, with the food, then maybe it could have been worked through. But the fact that he was willing to perv out toward a 16-year-old girl, it wasn't even worth trying with him, in my opinion. I think he was just abnormal. Maybe that's the best way to put it. I don't work there anymore, obviously, and I never saw Dave after that. I have no idea what happened to him, and in the end, I don't know that I care enough to even think about it beyond retelling this story. I believe in the power of positive actions. I think that when you put positivity into the universe, positivity comes back to you. For that reason, I try to spread positive energy, saying hello and smiling, asking people about their day and caring about their response. One summer, I took this to another level. As I walked into Wally World one day, I noticed an elderly woman waiting for the trolley that my town provides to take people from here to there in town. It's basically a small bus. It's for the elderly and for students, and the service is free. For everyone else, the cost is very minimal. After I finished my shopping and exited the store, I noticed the woman was still standing at the trolley stop. I asked her if she was waiting for the trolley, because the schedule on the pole at the stop indicated that the last trolley from this location had left a few minutes before I got there. The woman explained that someone had cut in front of her in line in the store and she was afraid she had missed the last trolley, but that she knew the trolley driver and was hoping he would come back to pick her up. Since it had been about 30 minutes since the trolley left, I wasn't convinced that was going to happen. I asked her if she lived nearby, and she said that she lived about a mile away. I told her that if she would allow me, I would be happy to drive her home. She agreed, and we put her shopping cart and groceries in the back of my SUV. I drove her to her home, rolled her shopping cart up the driveway, and left it and her on the front porch of the house. I waited for her to get safely inside, waved to her, and then went about my business. Feeling pretty good about myself, actually. Riding high on my good deed, I encountered an older gentleman a week or so later. He was also stranded by the trolley. I drove him home and he thanked me, and again I moved on with my life. Here's where the story gets crazy. One evening, I remembered that I was low on gas. The next morning, very early, I was expected to be present in my company's office. I normally work at home, but from time to time we are called in for a meeting or some other get-together at the office. So I decided to drive about 1.5 miles from my house to a convenience store gas station to get gas so I wouldn't have to get up extra early and deal with it in the morning. I normally just wake up in the morning, throw on some leggings and a t-shirt, and start my day. But going into the office meant that I would have to get up extra early to put on makeup, do my hair, and find a reasonable outfit for the office. So, at about dusk, I got in my car and headed to the gas station. I pulled up to the pump, got out, inserted my credit card, and started to fill my car with gas. As I completed gassing up, a young woman approached me. She looked to be in her early 20s and had a really strange look on her face. She said that she'd had an argument with her boyfriend and that he left her at the gas station with no way to get home. She asked me if there was any way I could give her a ride home. She told me she lived just right up the street, close but too far to walk. I felt a little reluctant. I don't know if it was just kind of a feeling, but I agreed, telling her I had to go into the gas station store and get one more thing and that I would be right back. When I entered the store, the clerk had a weird look on her face. She asked me what the young woman had said to me. I told her the story and that I was going to give her a ride home. The clerk told me to wait right there. She said that I should not go back to my car outside. She even asked if I had locked the doors, which I had because I'm completely paranoid about somebody hiding in my back seat. I asked the clerk what was going on, and she said that the police had been called. She turned her computer screen so that I could see it. There was a picture of the young woman from the parking lot with the word alert above her head. My blood ran cold. After what seemed like forever, 3 police cars roared into the parking lot with their lights flashing. The police approached the young woman, who attempted to run, but they apprehended her and put her in handcuffs. I looked in the back of one of the other police cars and saw a young man. A few minutes later, one of the police officers came into the store and began talking to the clerk. I asked the officer what was going on. She said that this young woman and her boyfriend had been stalking people at gas stations and convenience stores and convincing them to give the young woman a ride home. When the person obliged, the young woman led the Good Samaritan to a dark street where her accomplice would wait. The two then robbed the driver, beat them, and stole their car. They had apparently been doing this all across the South, mainly in small and friendly towns. I didn't mention to the officer that I had agreed to give the young woman a ride. I just walked to my car, got in, locked the doors, and drove home. I shook all the way home thinking about what could have happened to me that evening. When I got home, I hugged my daughter extra tight. My good deed could have made her an orphan. It took a little while before I felt safe going out in the evening or at night. I still try to spread positivity into the world, and I am kind to people. My philosophy is never be anyone's last straw. However, I no longer give strangers rides. I wanted to share something that happened to me just last year. 2023 was a very difficult year for me. My father had died from lung cancer, and my mom and I had never really been close. So when I was distraught and looking for comfort, she wasn't there. They got divorced when I was a teenager, and since then, when it came to my father, She was indifferent and dismissive. I was in a pretty serious relationship, but right before my father passed, my girlfriend left me, due to me, apparently, being too emotional and not caring enough about her. I had actually just financed an engagement ring and was planning on proposing. Shortly after she left, I learned that she was seeing my so-called friend, and the math didn't add up between us breaking up and her getting with him, which was pretty heartbreaking. So within 6 months, I lost my dad, my 8-year relationship with my girlfriend, my friend, and emotionally, my mom. Needless to say, I was in a pretty dark place. One night, I was having trouble sleeping and contemplating the future of my life. I needed to get out of my little apartment and clear my head, so around midnight, I decided to just drive around. And sometimes a quiet drive on an empty road late at night can be pretty therapeutic. At the time, I just drove where I wanted. I didn't really have a destination in mind. I didn't use GPS. I just drove and turned where I was drawn to turn. I didn't even care if I was back the next day for work, or if I came home at all at that point. I'd been driving for a few hours at this point, but I wasn't quite ready to go home yet. However, I was going to need to refuel. I finally pulled off the highway when I saw the next exit for gas. When I rolled into the gas station, it was honestly pretty unremarkable. It wasn't the big ones that I was used to, like Casey's or Quick Trip. I'm from the Midwest, so I don't remember the name of it. There were 2 pumps, and it looked pretty ancient. The screen was digital, and based on the looks of the place, I'm sure that was fairly new for them. Another thing that made it seem new was that it couldn't even take cards at the pump. You had to go inside. So I made my way into the store to pay. Next to the store, there was a woman sitting on the concrete, in front of the ice box. She looked pretty normal, in the sense that she was wearing shorts, a tank top, and flip-flops. She had shoulder-length, dark, curly hair, and appeared to be playing some game on her phone with a severely cracked screen. She looked up at me and smiled, and I just nodded back to her and went inside. I bought a candy bar and $20 worth of gas, and the attendant bid me a good night. As I was walking back to my car, someone called out to me, just saying, "Excuse me, sir?" I was the only one around, so I assumed it was towards me. I turned around to see the same woman as earlier walking up to me. Seeing her walking closer to me, I could tell that she looked a little rough. Her legs and feet were really dirty. The shirt was pretty faded and looked almost too big on her, and she honestly just looked tired. And, to be honest, I sympathized with her. Maybe that was my fault. She asked me if I had a cigarette she could have, and I declined. I didn't smoke, so I just apologized. I got to my car, took the cap off my tank, and she seemed to just be pacing in the parking lot, looking around. I felt bad, so I pulled out a few bills that I had and waved over to her. I asked if she might be able to buy a pack with it. She smiled and thanked me a dozen times before running into the gas station. I began filling up when she came back outside drinking a soda. I made eye contact with her, and she walked over to the pump I was at. She held up the bottle and said something about it being cheaper and better for her than cigarettes anyways. I laughed and agreed with her, and she again thanked me, holding out her hand and telling me her name. I had no reason to lie, so I did the same. We had a very short conversation while I was refueling. Where are you from? It's quite hot out right now. Shared some grievances about hating the heat. But when I was finished was when things took a hard turn. I shut the door to my tank and nodded to her to signal that I was leaving when she stopped me. She put her hand on my chest and she asked me if I would take her home with me. I stepped back, again, laughing. Sometimes I often do that in awkward situations. Her smile faltered a bit, and she said that she was being serious. I then politely declined, saying that I wasn't interested in that, and her smile completely vanished. She threw her arms down to her side, and much like a child throwing a tantrum, she started screaming. She was calling me names. She said I was just like all the others. I was taken aback by this outburst and slowly backed away from her. I was walking to my door so I could just get out of there, but she seemed to notice that too. This lady jumped on the hood of my car, crawling across it to the driver's door, and stood in front of it screaming. I was trying to calm her down and reason with her, as stupid as that was. Why did I need to explain to a stranger why I didn't want them to come home with me? But no amount of reasoning seemed to be working, as she pulled out a knife. It looked like just a plain old kitchen steak knife. I couldn't even begin to figure out where she was concealing it. She held it up, ready to strike me, and I took off towards the building. I didn't even notice the attendant was standing outside watching us. We made eye contact, and before I could say anything other than, he motioned for me to step aside, and he made his way towards the woman who was now kicking and slicing my poor car with this knife. I watched as they yelled at each other, and she charged at him, but he smoothly dodged her, grabbed her hand that was wielding the knife, causing her to drop it. He then wrestled her to the ground, where he held her there. He hollered for me to grab something in the store, which turned out to be a package of zip ties, and he bound her wrist behind her, and brought her over to sit by the pump, where she continued to kick at it, with blood running down her leg. I'm guessing that was from wherever she was keeping that knife. He came over and asked if I was alright, and I told him that I was. He then explained to me that she was a regular around there, as in she regularly loitered, mooching off of people, but she rarely went berserk like that, joking that I must have done something to piss her off. I explained what happened while he waited for the police to show up. The man told me he was a retired police officer, so he knew how to handle the situation, not to mention her normal tactics. When the police arrived, they quickly got her up and started talking to her, calling her by name. So, they were obviously familiar with her too. I had to give a statement, because I was still paying for my car, so I had to report this all to my insurance, unfortunately. Before she was put in the cop car, she looked over at me and smiled like I had just given her the money for the soda. The man apologized for the scene that she had caused, and afterwards, I was back on the road, ready to go home. The whole event, from the time I pulled into that gas station to leaving, only lasted a few hours, but by the time I got home, I was beyond ready to crash. I left my apartment in hopes to clear my head, and I guess, in a way, it kind of worked. I was going through a lot, and I thought that I was helping another person by giving her some cash, just trying to be friendly, but it all backfired. If I hadn't reacted fast enough, she could have stabbed me in my shoulder, or worse. Hell, had I decided to take her home, what if I said something there that upset her? Or while we were in the car? Maybe that was her plan from the beginning, but who knows. I'd like to think that she was just having a really bad day, but the fact that she had that knife did not leave me with any good feelings about her. Ultimately, I was just glad that everyone came out of this situation mostly unscathed. I am in a better place now, for the most part, but more importantly, I hope that she is also in a better state of mind, too. My sister Paula moved into a brand new house in a very pretty neighborhood and was very excited. Once she moved in her furniture and winter was approaching, She planned a huge Christmas party to beat all parties. She had a male and female caterer come who prepared everything and even carted away the dishes. Wow. After the fabulous party, I could not sleep, and something inside me kept going over and over everything. We always lock up well, so why the unease? Paula came over to my house the next day, and as she told me about her fitful night and how she couldn't sleep, I shouted that I too had the same issue. Suddenly she bolted up and said for me to come. We talked while driving there, saying all the same feelings. Fear and concerns about security that I'd had. When we got there, all was well and quiet. She said that we were going to check every window downstairs and then upstairs methodically. What we found was that someone had tried, from the inside, to take off the cat stand for him to be able to look out the laundry room window on the front of the house. But we had rigged it so that it was very secure, thankfully. But it was definitely disturbed. But over in the next dining room window, it was unlocked. When she'd bought the home, she'd changed and upgraded all the locks, and also checked that every window was secured. But here it was, unlocked. Upstairs, one other window was also opened straight above the other one in the front bedroom. My uncle had his own security business, and quickly installed a nice system for her, because she had lost all sense of safety now. He explained one person drives up in the driveway, then another two go through the house, with one on each floor to save time. Then one drops a pillowcase of your things out the top window, then the other from the first floor, and then the driver takes off with everything in under 7 minutes, even in a 4-bedroom home. It could have been a catastrophe, because we believed they were about to return after having set the house up. We were glad that we listened to that little voice. So, later, we also found a torn bathroom screen cut to push out in a V, and even the metal bending tool still on the ledge for further use. With all the nice security system and camera features, she really felt good about her house again. She'd had her air conditioned serviced. Later on, as the season changed, the man had acted rather forward with her, flirty and coming on to her after wrapping up the details of paying his company for the seasonal maintenance. It was crazy. They'd always been good and professional. We'd used them many years in our family. He left, and she was glad, living alone there. Later the next day, she became angry with the new malfunctioning alarm system. A zone that didn't exist reported a problem, and a red light was on at the back door. She was exasperated. My uncle got on the floor looking at the details, when I said I was going to look downstairs. This was a hardwired system, before the wireless ones had come out. As he checked his wire in her back door frame, I looked in her basement, and bingo. There, tucked up into the basement rafter, was a wire to her back door, cut, like gardeners do, at an angle like you would cut a rose. But electricians cut copper wire straight across to save all that they can of it, since it's expensive, and you may later need just to stretch it. We knew nobody but him had been in that house. We quickly repaired it, and set that alarm religiously. I really feel the first people intended to burglarize her house, and the second furnace man was going to assault her by entering her back door quietly, knowing that the back door was cut, and then was going to ascend the steps to her bedroom. Thank God it was all averted by listening to our gut and acting quickly to secure her home, and not procrastinate. Don't be scared, and be prepared. Hello, my name is Amber. I will not be using my last name or some other people's last names in this story for privacy reasons. In 1966, when I was only 20 years old, I worked as a hostess for a Florida nightclub. The Florida nightclub, which shall remain nameless, was beautiful. But it was notorious as well because it was owned by a Florida mob boss, Santo Trafficante Jr., who was Florida's mob boss from 1954 to 1987. Trafficante Jr. was a powerful mob boss. He not only controlled Florida with an iron hand, but controlled organized crime in Cuba as well. Santo Trafficante Jr. had ties with the Bonanno crime family in New York, but closer ties with the mob boss Carlos Marcello of New Orleans, and Sam Giancana of Chicago. Santo was allies with corrupt Cuban leader Batista, and was anti-Castro when Fidel Castro took over Cuba and threw the mobsters out in 1959. Santo Trafficante Jr., Sam Giancana, and Carlos Marcello were all alleged to plotting the death of President John Kennedy, because the president had his brother, Bobby, go after the mob very hard through all his mob hearings that sent many mobsters to prison. The Florida nightclub I was working had many mob people along with regular customers coming in and out. The nightclub had strippers, along with comedy and ventriloquist acts. I was good friends with one particular stripper named Bunny. Bunny was a total knockout. A drop-dead gorgeous lady with a big mane of long golden blonde hair. She had a large chest and a curvaceous figure, and was nicknamed Boom Boom because of her chest going boom boom whenever she walked. Many of the male customers at this Florida nightclub loved Bunny, but dared not touch because she was Frankie's girl. I even marveled at Bunny's physique, along with some of the other ladies as well, not just men. Bunny always dressed nicely in body-hugging miniskirts and sandal high-heeled shoes on her feet, and that showed off her fantastic body even more. She looked smashing. Bunny's boyfriend, Frankie, was nicknamed Diesel because he loved motorcycles and cars, and liked to work on them. He also loved to lift weights. Diesel was dangerous looking, but good looking at the same time. Diesel was a muscular young man with neatly cut brown hair, and like Bunny, he liked to dress nicely. He wore suits, or could be more casual in a short-sleeved top with blue jeans. Diesel was a mob associate of Santo Trafficante Jr., and made a lot of money through many of Trafficante Jr.'s illegal activities. He often joined his boss, Santo, in Cuba as well. Bunny and Diesel made a very attractive-looking couple, but they did argue over money a lot. Diesel also beat up Bunny from time to time, and cheated on her as well with other lovely ladies around town. I personally never really liked Diesel that much. Diesel may have been good-looking, but he was a beast. In Santo Trafficante's nightclub, there were many secret passageways. I've seen a few myself. One led to his office in the back, and one led to a huge and opulent-looking basement where big parties took place. I was at some of these parties. In one big party, I personally saw my friend Bunny pop totally nude out of a huge birthday cake, smiling for Santo's birthday party. Plus, once on Halloween, I saw one person dressed in a full white rabbit costume from Alice in Wonderland, with a big red heart in front of his chest, wearing a black top hat that had a circular watch in the middle. I saw this man in the white rabbit costume talking with the party guests, and later on, in another secret room, I saw him injecting drugs with the big needle he had in his hand to several guests. Bunny later told me that the white rabbit was none other than her boyfriend, Diesel. These big basement secret parties were fueled with alcohol, pills, drugs, and some nudity. This was not really my cup of tea. I was just a young working girl only there to make some money for myself, and nothing more. Diesel seemed to be a happy man. His job was secure in the mob, and he was a good earner for them, but his relationship with his beautiful girlfriend, Bunny, did not seem to get any better. Diesel accused Bunny of cheating with a good-looking fellow mobster who we will call Joey, to protect his privacy. Even though Diesel was cheating on Bunny, he wanted to whack Joey for being with her. But Diesel was not a made man and did not have the clout or say to do so. Diesel was still an associate for the mob and not in high standing. So Santo made the peace between the two men and told Joey to cool it with Diesel's girl. The two men shook hands, but things were still simmering under the surface between the two young mobsters. One day, I was shocked to hear that Diesel was accusing him of stealing money from his own Florida mob, and Santo had him whacked. Soon, Diesel was found dead by the FBI in the trunk of his own red Ford Mustang car, with one bullet shot through his baby blue eyes. Diesel was very dead. I wondered where my friend Bunny was. A full 4 years later, a secret photo and a letter came into my mailbox. The photo had Joey and Bunny's photo lying on the beach together in their bathing suits, enjoying cocktails as they tipped their drinks to me, giving me a nice toast. Bunny told me in her letter that it was her and her lover Joey who were stealing millions of mob money, not Diesel. They were smart enough to protect their money in Swiss bank accounts that the FBI did not even know about, as they also protected themselves in the newly formed Witness Protection Program, which had been formed in 1970. Bunny also told me that Joey and she had also changed their names and fingerprints, and were now married, living in an undisclosed tropical paradise. The Florida mob was not even looking for them, really, because they had always thought it was Diesel stealing all the mob millions, not Bunny and her new husband, Joey. But Bunny and Joey wanted to make sure they had a clean getaway from the mob to start a new romantic life together with all their millions of dollars. They fooled everybody, and I was happy for them and wished them the best. As I looked at their lovely photo together, lying on the beach in the bathing suits, smiling at me with their cocktail glasses raised to me, honestly, Bunny never looked happier. This happened to me back in the 80s when I was working at the bank in Richmond. My friend Marty and I would eat lunch together most days. We worked at a data center where there wasn't much around us except a sub shop across the street. We would get our food and walk back and eat in our lunchroom. Most of the time, we would get a 12-inch sub and split it between us. On this particular day, we decided to go and get our normal 12-inch tuna sub and split it. We purchased the sub like we did all the other times and brought it back. We both took a half of the sub. I was the first to take a bite. After I bit into the sub, it started crunching, and it wasn't lettuce. Marty was looking at me so funny. I spit it out and ran my fingers through it, and all throughout the sub were tiny pieces of glass. That freaked us out. I'm so glad that I didn't swallow it. We got both halves of our subs to take back over to the sub shop. We walked in and she looked surprised to see us back. We told her what we found in our food and she thought it was funny. That pissed us off. And she asked if we wanted another sub and we said, no, we want our money back. And she went back and got the manager and he acted nonchalant about the whole thing. Well, that put Marty and me into a revenge kind of mood. I could have really been injured. We got our money back and went back to the office. We looked up the number for the health department, and Marty called them. She explained what we had just been through, and they told us they would check it out. A couple of days go by, and the health department calls us back. They went to the shop, and they were using a cracked crock pot to store the tuna in. Well, they gave them 24 hours to get a new crock pot, and they needed to discard that tuna immediately. When they went back to check if they had complied, they were still using the same crock pot. I guess they thought it was all still a joke. They ended up getting closed down, and it turned into a car lot. But it is so scary what could have happened if I swallowed that glass. Well, this is my scary sub-story. It may not be the scariest, but it sure as hell freaked me out. I dated a man in 2000. I had a new job, a new car, and a new guy. I also had just finished a new degree, I was happy in my new job and things were all going great until they weren't. The guy that I dated invited me over to dinner after work and had cooked some great Italian food for me. I really appreciated it. It felt so nice to be cared about and for. I smiled down deep into my soul. We talked and unwound our day's events, and he said something rather unimportant, and I responded with an innocent, I bet, or maybe an, oh really, or maybe, I'm sure. It just nothing. Suddenly he went rather ballistic over the non-comment. I was baffled. What's that supposed to mean? He demanded. I was really dumbstruck with such rage. Why? I had said it was nothing. Just an acknowledgement that I was listening was all. But he took it like I was being sarcastic, I suppose. We had dated months and months by this time, and I couldn't imagine this reaction. It actually scared me how angry he'd become out of nowhere about nothing. I suddenly felt alone, empty and void. There was something evil in the air. We'd been having such a great talk, and dinner was delicious, damn it. What was happening, and why was he acting so furious? I conquered my fear with the antidote of my own anger. He always would tell me to call him, so he knew I got home safely, and as I stood and said, I need to get home, of course he fell into his routine. It struck me that maybe he was just keeping tabs on me. Anyway, I left and heard my thoughts say that I would never again return or answer his calls. That always came daily. Sometimes he would call and sing a love song on my business voicemail or just say he wanted to say good morning, and it always made my day. But something was as if it struck an explosive note and things just could not return to how they were. I was never told he was bipolar by him or anyone, and apparently he was very well managed with regular medication he had taken religiously, but his brother later confided that he had stopped taking them, and that it would make him feel more alive and creative, and he would then compose guitar pieces and sing beautifully when he was in his manic state. I knew writers and artists were also no stranger to bipolar men and women of talent. It wasn't fair that he'd also not told me, I thought. Things escalated with his symptoms that can be very typical. I'd read volumes of things on the subject. He'd travel on a whim hundreds of miles and gave away his new truck. He had affairs going with different women. He had knocked on my sister's door at 3 a.m. to talk to her about music since she too was a musician. She'd called the police, and when they asked him if he knew what time it was, he said yes. She had to get up at 5. Another Sunday evening, my sister and I, along with my parents, took a long rambling ride from Kentucky long into Indiana, and ate lunch and then went back and talked in my living room. My dad fell asleep and was snoring, as my mother crumpled up on a couch and my sister nestled on the love seat. I decided to just go lie in my bed in the back of the house, so I did. In a while, I heard my sister's blood-curdling scream. I came running in there and everyone was sat bolt upright. She told me that my ex-boyfriend had walked right up to the living room window and was just staring in. I guess she felt the stare and woke up. I'm sure it may have looked funny with all of them sleeping. I was so glad that I had moved to my bedroom. He was tall enough that she saw him staring into the room. He had not called, knocked, or rang the doorbell, and he left immediately. I later learned that he tried to end his own life, and maybe have finally been successful. But I haven't been informed, so I don't know, only that he did die. But before I knew of his passing, I had a very weird dream that was so real. I dreamed that I was in my bed and suddenly felt someone sit on my right side. I felt the mattress push down and felt someone close to me staring at me. I opened my eyes and just saw him there looking in my eyes. Then, after a couple of seconds, I awoke and thought that it felt like I couldn't move, as people have described. I truly feel that he was a troubled spirit, and when I think of him, I say a prayer for him. It was a scary time for those months. Hi, Raven. This story could fall under the vacation or late night scary stories. It's both. In the early 1990s, my family went on a summer vacation. We had a nice time and were on our way back in the car that we had rented. It was around 11 p.m. We all needed the bathroom and a snack break and a good old-fashioned rest stop. We were just over the state line between two southern states. We came to a rest stop area very quickly, and we pulled in. There were a few cars there and some tractor trailers off to the side for the night. My family got out of the car and walked toward the building. As we approached, I saw 3 people in an apparent heated discussion on the sidewalk. As we got closer, I saw that it was a man and a woman talking to a third person. We couldn't see who the third person was because they were mostly blocked from view by the man and the woman. Suddenly, the man turned away from the third person, and a nearby light in the parking lot illuminated his face. He wore an expression of pure terror. I realized then that something was horribly wrong. The man quickly grabbed the woman by her arm and pulled her toward their car. As they moved away from the third person, I saw the reason for their terror. The third person was a man holding a .45 caliber pistol on them. Oddly, he was wearing sunglasses at 11 o'clock at night. I thought that he was going to shoot the man and the woman, but once they had moved, he saw us. They made it to their car and drove out of there fast. The rest of my family saw all this at the same time that I did. My dad immediately urged us to run. We scattered in different directions, trampling the grass that had big signs saying not to walk on it. I made it to the building alone. I wasn't sure where everyone else had gone, but I didn't see the creep with the gun anymore. I went down the east side of the building. It was dim, and I felt that it was my best chance to hide. I then came upon a bathroom, but decided not to trap myself in a place like that. I kept going, wondering what the man had planned to do to us. Was he going to kill us? If he did, he would probably leave our bodies in the woods. Animals would scatter our bones and no one would ever know what happened to us. We'd be one of those unsolved cases. How did a whole family disappear at the same time? The idea made me very angry, and I was determined to get us out of there alive. So I formulated a plan. My dad had brought his rifle with him, and since we were staying in a rural area during our vacation, he would practice with it. The rifle was in the car. My dad had the keys. The only thing that I could do was try to get back to the car and kick a window in. I continued down the side of the building, and as I reached the corner, I crouched down low to peek around it. The creep was not there. No one was there. I made my way along the back of the building and crouched again at the next corner. Again, no creep. Thank goodness. I followed along the west side of the building, which would take me back to the front. At the front corner, I carefully peeked around to see who was in the parking lot. There was no one. I listened. There were no sounds of movement, so I dashed for the nearest vehicle and ducked down behind it. I didn't hear anyone. I looked underneath it for feet, but no one was to be found. So I carefully wound my way towards our parking space, keeping low behind the cars and watching for feet. I was gauging how hard I would have to kick the window in to be able to break it. At last, I reached our vehicle. At the same moment, so did my dad. He quickly unlocked it, and seconds later the rest of our family came running to the car. We drove out of there as fast as possible. The creep had reached the front of the building as we were exiting the parking lot. I didn't know who he had been tailing or where he had been, and I felt numb as we drove away into the night. But also thankful to have gotten out of there safely. Hey, Raven. I just want to say, first of all, that I love your channel, and I love your storytelling abilities. I could listen to you all day. This is the first time I've ever submitted a story, so please bear with me. Thank you, Adam. This happened in the early 90s in Liverpool, United Kingdom. My sister, who was about 23 at the time, worked in one of those boutique shops within a shopping center. You know, one of those shops that sold everything from toiletries to furniture, toys to Christmas decorations. They also had smaller stores in there too, like a small shoe shop, a seasonal shop that sold Christmas trees at Christmas, fireworks on bonfire night, cards and seasonal gifts for Valentine's, Mother's and Father's Day, Easter, etc. She didn't really like the job. She was doing it for the extra money. She was also working full-time at a cinema in the evening and weekends, which she did really like. They had a little room downstairs where they would have their break. It wasn't much of a room. It was a table and chairs, like those wooden ones you get outside in a pub beer garden, but a little bit smaller, meaning you couldn't move the chairs as they were attached to the table. She would normally get a 15-minute break in the morning, and then an hour's lunch, and another 15 minutes in the afternoon. She always preferred to eat her lunch on her own because she gets very self-conscious with other people watching her eat. It stems back to growing up and always getting bullied for how she ate or making too much noise. And she noticed that the guy who worked in the shoe shop, let's call him Amir, started to time his breaks with hers. At first, it was just the last 5 or 10 minutes, which wasn't too bad, but then she would see him planning for his break when she was getting ready to go for hers. When she would get down to the break room, he would be sitting there. There didn't seem to be anything off with him. He was an older gentleman, maybe 50s and early 60s, and he was pleasant and friendly enough. Then, the inappropriate questions started. So are you single then? Would you date an older gentleman like me? She just smiled politely, trying not to be rude. The fact that he was possibly 50 years older than her, he obviously didn't see that as a problem. She remained polite, but tried to keep her distance as best as she could. She would go to the bakery in the shopping center for her lunch, or eat her sandwiches outside. Amir then started buying her chocolates and flowers with creepy notes like, "To my number one girl." One shift, he waited for her to go on her break, and then followed her downstairs. Instead of sitting on the bench opposite, he sat next to her, which meant that she had to move up to let him sit down. He put his hand on her arm and said, "Have you been avoiding me?" "No," she replied, her voice clearly shaking. He then rubbed her arm and said, "I was buying you nice things, and then you ignored me." She thought that she heard someone shout her name from upstairs. Well, if she didn't, she was going to make out like she did. She managed to squeeze past Amir and run upstairs. She went straight to the supervisor and told her everything that had gone on over the last weeks with Amir and his inappropriate behavior. The supervisor's response was even more shocking than Amir's behavior. She said, "Oh, that's just Amir. He does it to everyone. He won't be the first, and you won't be the last." It was then that she realized she could not stay there. He may have just been a harmless, lonely old man, but then again, he might have been something much, much darker. I've never really had many encounters with the paranormal, besides seeing a shadow figure occasionally while growing up, and still do, and constantly having lucid-ish dreams of my running through a forest. Same thing every time, but I don't know if that is paranormal. Anyway, this happened on August 23rd. It was around 10 p.m. and I was home alone. My dad was driving back from dropping my older brother back off at college, which was about an hour away. I was sitting on my couch, the recliner up, and had my blanket over me because it was cold. My dog is a Chihuahua and a black Labrador mix. Her name is Lulu. Lulu was under my blanket and laying between my legs like she normally does when I'm sitting in the living room. I was watching Criminal Minds, the episode 7 Seconds, and was at the part where Reed and Morgan were searching the girl's family's house. Lulu has separation anxiety, and if I leave a room, she has to follow. She doesn't like me going to the bathroom without her. And sometimes I'll actually shut my room door when she's still in there so she'll scratch and whine at the door. Which is fine, but on this particular night, reminder, she's practically in my lap. It's dark in the house because I like watching the TV in the dark, and my room door is closed. It's at the end of the hallway, and I suddenly heard what sounded like Lulu whining and scratching at my door. It sounded just like her. The way her nails would sound on my door. The way the door would shake, and even the high-pitched cues like she's being murdered. And for a split second, I thought it was her. But then Lulu shot up from her spot on the couch and gets out of the blanket. She climbed on to me a little and just started growling. And I got freaked out because the sound from my door was still happening. I moved my dog off of me and get up. The sound stops when I stand at the end of the hallway, but I'm still freaked out and turn the hallway light on. I grab the pocket knife on the table and open my door, and there's nothing there. There's no marks on the door. Nothing. So I think I'm going crazy, but my dog, who followed me, is still growling and on edge. So I just close my room door and go back to watching Criminal Minds. My family doesn't believe me, and I still have no idea what that was. In the mid-2000s, I worked at a call center. It was a warehouse building converted into a call center with thousands of square feet filled with cubicles. Back then, companies still had designated smoking areas. Ours was a fenced-in patio, and a large number of employees, including me at the time, smoked cigarettes. So there was this new guy that I would see who I started talking with on my smoke breaks. Dude had a rockabilly look with tattoo sleeves. It seemed like a really chill dude. We would chat about common interests and would probably have hung out at some point, but he disappeared suddenly. I found out later, through the gossip grapevine, that he was fired, supposedly for accessing adult content on his work computer. Kind of odd, as the cubicles at this place had low walls with no privacy. Anyone standing up could see your screen. But he was gone. A little while later, a coworker posted a bulletin on MySpace with a link to a news story. It was about the coworker who disappeared. Apparently he was divorced, and despite being in a new relationship, he couldn't get over his ex. So, he went to her apartment, cut a hole in the door with a chainsaw, and started shooting through the hole with an assault rifle. The dude killed his ex-wife's new boyfriend and shot her several times. She survived. However, she was pregnant and the unborn child did not. I remember my coworker friend having a hard time with this. She was apparently close with this dude and really empathized with his mental issues. While she didn't condone what he had done, she was disgusted how the prosecution asserted that he was faking his mental health issues. Anyway, this kind of messed with me for a bit, because the dude always seemed totally chill in our interactions. I always found it fun to BS with him, and even felt a little sad when he just stopped being around on my smoke breaks. I guess it just goes to show that you never really know what's going on with some people. I had come home late from my sister's house, which is not far from my own. We had opened our business that year, and sometimes we found that we were working out details for hours as it got later and later. I made it inside my house and closed and locked the door as usual, and hung up my heavy coat. I called my sister briefly and said that I was home, that all was well, and she hung up. I had a quick bath and couldn't wait to hit my bed. I laid there for only 15 minutes when my sister reminded me of the presidential debates. They were on now. I decided that I did want to see it, so I hauled myself out of bed, and my miniature white poodle, Minnie, rest in peace, and I sat in a recliner, and she was right on my lap. And I had the debates on medium settings, and she went fast asleep. I started getting into the jibes and sarcasm, the poking and prodding and manipulation and wordplay jousting. Suddenly my little dog awoke, stood up and growled and let out a ferocious bark, and a loud shot rang out. It sounded like it was inside my house. I have really nice replacement windows in my house that make it super quiet. Generally, I hear nothing outside, but it was so loud that my ears rang. I recalled that my windows are triple pane and argon gas filled, which ensures the quiet and prevents temperature changes, keeping warm air inside in the winter and cool air inside in the summer, so they save you money with their good thermal insulation. If you were to have someone break, or yes, cut that window, then the gas pops loudly, causing an unbelievable sound that would have set off my glass break/percussion sensor. But though I had my security system on, it didn't go off. My dog awoke and stood and growled then barked, and I'd said, "A bad dream?" And then I heard that loud shot. What the hell? The next day I inspected all of my windows and found nothing. The bricks of my house, everywhere that I felt the sound emanated from, and it was definitely behind my head from the living room window at the front of the house. To this day, I've never found a slug or break in the window, but I am glad that I had my poodle witness. I saw your request for a creepy Coworker Stories, and I've been meaning to reach out to you for a long time because I probably literally have 100 stories I could tell you. I have a lot of weird experiences. So, I'm a nurse, and I started working at a hospital, and they were training me on the night shift with this guy named Jamarcus. That is so nice. So I was telling him all kinds of weird paranormal experiences I've had, and he was sitting across the table from me, and it was about 3 in the morning. I noticed he was getting tired and probably bored. His eyes were getting heavy, and he was about to doze off. As I sat across from him, my peripheral vision saw a portal in the corner of the ceiling. It was probably about 18 inches in diameter, and it was black speckles making up the circle. Anyway, I looked directly at it, and it was still there. So I'm at a point talking and telling Jamarcus how I don't like to watch scary movies because I feel demons are attached to them, and you're kind of letting that into your house or space or whatever by it just being on the screen. All of a sudden, he pops his head up, and his face morphs into this creepy face. He literally kind of walks on his elbows across the table, gets up into my face, and in a demonic voice says, "Yeah, you don't like that you can't take it, can you?" Then he just kind of goes back and, melts back down asleep into his chair. I was like, what the hell? I worked with Jamarcus for 6 years after that, and he is so nice. I like him and I consider him a friend, and I never told him what happened. It's hard to even believe that something could have spoken through such a sweet guy. It kind of gives you some weird food for thought.